Dad. Happy Sabbath, everybody. Hello to you all out there. Today I'm going to talk about grandparents. Because, right, it's a struggle sometime to know your audience, I guess. You know, you plan on getting up here and you wonder, who exactly are you speaking to? Are you speaking to somebody that's hearing the truth for the first time, or are you trying to feed the flock that's been, faithful for 40, 50, 60 years, longer than I've been around, much longer than I've been around? Is it for children? Is it for rank beginners? Is it for the experienced? It's hard to know exactly who you're talking to sometime, but I think it's a pretty safe bet if we talk to grandparents, if we talk about grandparents. And really, it's applicable across role models, any kind of role model, anything like that, anybody that would attempt to have a positive influence on another life, on a child's life in particular, but on any other life, to do these kinds of things. Wanted to talk about grandparents. I recently lost my last grandparent, my last one. She passed away on August 20th, just about a month ago, a little more than a month ago. Mammy. I call her Mammy. That's a colloquialism in French for grandma. Grandmère, Mimi, Mammy. It's all like slang, French slang. They're French Canadians, so it's kind of slangy compared to the Frenchies. It's not the same stuff at all. But Mammy, sweet Mammy. Pierrette, name's actually Pierrette. Pierrette, you get Cardinal, Reisner, because 3 weird names isn't enough. You got to have 4 minimum. She would have been 91 on Thursday, this last Thursday. She would have turned 91 if she had made it. So she was 90 years old when she passed away. Melody read an article not all that long ago she told me about, which was about grandparents and the positive impact that grandparents can have on grandchildren's lives, in that, you get the same kind of lessons and guidance and things that you get from your parents, but you get it in a different way. You get it from a different generation, and so in a way it backs it up, it supports it on an even broader base than if it's just coming from a single individual. And I mean, you can see the same effect in, from a single parent to having both parents in the home, and then to having, one active grandparent, multiples. The more good influences, the more positive role models that you have, like the more child can learn and understand and emulate. They can see those examples at work. That's a powerful thing, and that's part of the Word of God, to raise children in the way that's right, and to look over them, and to be kind and offer that guidance, and to be an example, and all of those things. It's really foundational throughout this book. And in many ways, in families, in the church's role to the world, and so on and so forth. God is our Father. You see that analogy all through it. This grandparent in particular was kind of like another parent to me, very much so. I spent a lot of time with her. My parents split up. I was young, 2 or so, and my mother went back to work, and so I spent time with Mammy. It was me and Mammy hanging out. It's like a mom, 5 days a week, all day, every day, and that was tremendously beneficial to me, to have her there, to have somebody that cares and watching over you. It made that relationship extra special, and I feel like there's a lot in retrospect and looking back and thinking about her life. When you lose somebody, you have occasion to pause and look back over those moments, and you maybe put them in context of what they meant to you, and the lessons that were there that you didn't necessarily take as going along, in the moment. As kids grow up, you live, whatever. You're busy, you're doing things, but in retrospect, you can really see that, and you can see the kind of impact that another has had on your life. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it," or when he is grown, paraphrasing. Grandparents can have a huge, meaningful impact, and it doesn't necessarily have to be some overt, teaching moment, some lesson that you get ready and, put them through or anything like that. But there's lots of little things along the way. Children learn through observation. They learn by mimicking, by having normal conversations, just being present for normal conversations between adults, picking up on the cues that there, and, just being around as you go through business, as you meet strangers, as you conduct the regular affairs of your life. Being present for that, being involved it's an education. in and of itself. It's an incidental education. It's the kind of thing that you get by spending time with them. And you don't cloister them or send them off in their room or put them on their device or ignore them or anything like that. When you're involved and you let them go around and do things with you, it's like it's like a friend. And you emulate your friends. You end up emulating your friends, and that's a powerful example. I'm going to try to do some principles and some scriptural stuff along the way, and I guess back it up with anecdotes, because that's kind of where my heart and mind has been. Some anecdotes. I'd like to turn to the book of Ecclesiastes, right after Proverbs. Ecclesiastes 9:10, just one verse. Whatsoever thy hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest. Especially the first part of that. The grave is coming for all of us at some point in time, and that's really why I'm talking about this today. But whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Be busy, be diligent. The way that you handle your business, even not the things where everybody's looking at you, but the stuff the rest of the time. My mammy didn't really ever have a real job, you know what I mean? But she always worked. She was always a very busy lady. The beds were always made. Everything was very tidy. It was very put together all the time in her house, or whenever she was, if she was at our house. She's putting stuff together there too. She stayed with Melody and I a couple years ago, and she's folding our laundry. Like, why? Because I don't know. She's just keeping busy, doing stuff. Whatever your hands finds to do. And it wasn't like a manic or an obsessive type of thing that everybody had to be, just perfect all the time. It was just very diligently kept up. You'd never find dishes in her sink overnight, because I guess she felt like that was her business, like that was her job, and it was done, and she wanted it put away and finished, and that was that. That's what her hand found to do, and she did it. I remember showing up unannounced at her house at 8 in the morning, like sharp, 8 o'clock sharp. She answers the door. She's completely dressed. She's got her shoes on. It's like, she's got her earrings, everything. Where you going, Mammy? She's not going anywhere. She's about her business. She's doing stuff. She's got stuff to do, and she's doing it, which is funny. It's a funny thing, but that's kind of how she confronted life. And she cleaned houses for extra money and babysat other kids and all sorts of things like that. And there were lots of stories and stuff that go along with that, and a lot of experience in that as well, handling people, handling children, handling things. Also like to read Proverbs 19. Proverbs 19, verse 16. He that keepeth the commandment keepeth his own soul, but he that despises his way shall die. That doesn't seem like the thing that I wanted to write down at all. Oh no, the verse before. Verse 15, slothfulness cast into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger. Be busy, don't be lazy, don't be sloppy, all that stuff. And, somebody in that situation, it's easy to just let it go and do the bare minimum, and then slowly everything starts to slide. That's not nearly the same kind of example, and I don't think that would have meant as much to me or anybody else that was around it or impacted by it in the long run without that diligence. Because it wasn't until, I was living on my own and everything's a mess all the time and there's just junk everywhere. It's like, wait a minute, I really don't like this. Like, this is wrong on a basic level. And so clean it up. Don't let it get out of control, because then it's going to be a big job. You keep up and it stays up better, and it makes life nicer. It makes your head clearer. There's a lot of studies into that as well. As far as your state of mind and clutter and having too many things going on, it can end up being quite a burden on you. Cleanliness, I'd like to, we kind of half touched on that already. I'd like to read Genesis 35. Genesis 35, starting in verse 1. And God said unto Jacob, Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there, and make there an altar unto God that appeared unto you when you fled from the face of Esau your brother. Then Jacob said unto his household, and to all that were with him, Put away the strange gods that are among you, and be clean, and change your garments. This is a principle in the Old Testament particularly. When you're approaching God, you can see it at the giving of the law, you can see it in the rituals regarding the priesthood, that you wash, and you put on clean clothes, and you're ready, you're careful in the way that you present yourself in that circumstance, but there's a practical aspect to it as well. And you can see that in many of the scriptures regarding uncleanness. If you're, defiled with a dead body or an animal or whatever has happened to you and you're unclean, some of that is ceremonial, but there's also a big practical aspect to it. Stay away from everybody else, wash yourself, stay away for a while, then come back in. You're clean. You keep yourself clean. That's how we present ourselves to God, but it's also a health thing. And if you extrapolate further, and our understanding of receiving the Holy Spirit, our bodies are like the temple of God. That's how you're keeping up the temple of God. Should the temple go 3 days without a shower? Is the temple walking around wearing yesterday's shirt? Being all grimy and stinky? Like I don't think so. You're not putting a good look on the temple there. And children learn through that, by the example that you set, by the standards that you set, and that you make them maintain. And these habits of filthiness or of cleanliness are ingrained at a young age, and it becomes what they're used to. I said that she used to babysit other kids. Well, I always heard this story about this one particularly dirty kid. And this kid was dirty all the time. He was like a little, like in Peanuts, there's Pig Pen, and he just takes his cloud of dust with him everywhere he goes. So this kid was always kind of dirty. And, Mammy was a crafty lady. She was a crafty lady. She said she'd had some yogurt, and the kid's right there. And she's like, oh, you got yogurt on your head. You got time to go get in the bath. Dirty kid, what can you do? You just make it work. And the kid probably felt a lot better when he was clean too. So I'm going to also read John 13:10 in the New Testament. This is at the Last Supper. And the ritual that Christ put in place that we follow every year on that same night. It's a very humbling ceremony to get down and wash another person's feet. The disciples were humiliated by it at the time. They thought it was beneath him, recognizing and knowing who he was, and yet it's an example in humility. And I wanted to focus on this verse, John 13:10. Jesus said to them, "He that is washed needs not save to wash his feet, but is clean every whit. And you are clean, but not all." And that last part, obviously, in reference to Judas Iscariot, who he knew was not truly one of their number, but would betray him shortly. And there's a spiritual analogy there that once you're washed, once you're forgiven, you need this refreshing every so often, but you are clean, and you can go on in confidence, and you can come repent before Jesus Christ, before the throne of God, and be clean again, as we need to, rinse off again occasionally. But that was also a custom at the time, because you're clean. Everybody assumes you're clean, but you've been walking around. Your feet are dirty. You're wearing sandals probably. It's all dusty everywhere. Wash your feet. You wash your feet, and you're really clean. You're clean enough to be inside and all that. That turned into a cliche in that side of my family. Wash your feet. My grandfather would always say that. He'd say, wash your feet before you go do things, or you put on fresh socks or anything, or you go to bed. He said, wash your feet. So it was kind of a joke, like, wash your feet. Kind of based on this, but not really, because it's also a practical thing. Saw an article a few years ago. It was about, you want to get to sleep better? Wash your feet before bed. It was like, good grief. There was something to it this whole time. It became a joke because they would say it so much that you'd say it back to them, like, wash your feet, because it's time. But it is, You ever put on clean socks and your feet haven't just been washed? Wash your feet first, then put on your clean socks, or before you go to bed at least, or whatever it may be. Wash your feet. And this isn't, none of this is a prohibitive type of excessive cleanliness or anything like that. Certainly not. She was very fun. She was very fun. Get the sofa cushions down and romp all over the place and make a big mess. You just got to clean it up when you're done. Or, run the hose in the mud and go play all afternoon long, right? But you're getting hosed before you come back inside, that's for sure, She would let me, we had this glass coffee table, and she'd be like, you want to play with your Hot Wheel cars? Yeah, absolutely. She'd cover it in flour in the living room on the carpet. She would cover the glass coffee table with flour and let you push it around. It was snow. Like, you push it around as if it's snow. A kid will play for hours in that. It makes a mess, but you vacuum it up. It's not the end of the world. It's just fun. Just have fun. The principle of do unto others. Luke 6, 36 through 38. Pretty basic stuff. Luke 6, 36 through 38. Be you therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. Judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you shall be forgiven. Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down and shaken together and running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that you mete withal, it shall be measured to you again. Showing kindness and respect to people, receiving the same in return. Going around with her, I remember very clearly that she was always able to get people to help her with whatever she needed. She was very polite to people that, maybe were not used to be having that much respect shown to them, clerks, janitors, people like that. She would say, "Oh, excuse me, sir, could you please help me with something for a minute?" And she's little, and she had a cute accent. I mean, all of that helps. But anywhere that she went with that attitude, whatever she needed help with, like, she was getting it. Strangers would put air in her tire for her, or hair. She didn't speak that clearly. She said, "Put some hair in my tire." That's funny. That's funny. But that's you get that back when you go out with that attitude and you're kind and you are helpful and you're respectful. You do get that back from people, and that makes a big difference of how smoothly and easily your life goes, because everybody has problems. Everybody needs help sometimes, even if it's just from clerks finding things in stores or recalcitrant people at businesses that don't really have time for you. If you're nice and respectful to them and you're understanding of their situation, you're going to get what you need a lot better as well. Everybody's going to be a lot happier when you handle things that way. Being forgiving. She's very quick to apologize. She would say, "Oh, I'm sorry, dear, you were right," or "I was mistaken," or whatever it may be. Quick. She realized she was wrong, there was some contention, or she thought you were messing up and you weren't. She was quick. Sometimes you were messing up, but if you weren't, she was quick to apologize and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, no big deal." Like, it's done, and it makes it easy for that to be reciprocated, and then we can, get over misunderstandings and, little squabbles and things that don't really matter. We had a big argument in 2008, she and I did, over Obama. We had a big argument. And did it really matter? No, she's Canadian. She can't vote here anyway. But it was a big argument, coming up to the election or whatever, and nobody knew that much about him, and she was very impressed. He's very well spoken, nice man. He's got a nice family. And I'm like, he's a wacko, mammy. Like, you don't know. Like, he's community organizing. Like, this is some radical stuff. And this was a long, contentious argument, and it didn't ended like, okay, we'll agree to disagree here. Here comes 2009, 2010. I get a call from Mammy. She was like, "Oh, dear, you know what? I'm sorry. You were right." After socialized healthcare, after, we try to get carbon credits going and all that stuff, it's like, oh, look, But that's a big deal. It's not easy necessarily to be like, "Oh, I was wrong. You were right. I'm mistaken." Just come off it. If you realize that you're mistaken, come off it. If I had realized I was mistaken, God willing, I would have had the gumption to come off it and be like, "I'm sorry, Mammy, Obama was a great guy." Wow. If only. Oh, man. What am I doing here? Blessed are the peacemakers, right? Matthew 5:9. They shall be called the children of God. It's a very useful skill to be able to de-escalate and to just take a step back. Verse 25 of Matthew 5 also says, agree with your adversary quickly. It goes on to say, while you're still on the way with him before he delivers you to the judge and you're going to jail and you're not getting out till they get every last penny from you. But the principle behind that is stop before it goes too far. Like, make peace while you still can, because the situation can get escalated to the point that there's no coming back from it. You can break relationships, or you can make an enemy and you didn't really need to. It's important to avoid that at all costs. In personal relationships, marriages, business relationships, friends, whatever it may be. You got to be able to tone it down sometimes before it's too late to go back any farther. I don't remember she and my grandfather fighting or anything like that, but if she had something to say, she would break into French, and she would jabber in French there for a minute, and she would have her say, and if it ended with "comme de raison," it means "what's the reason?" or "why?" or whatever, and she'd be done, and then he would have the last word, and she would say, "Yes, Ralph. Yes, Ralph." And it was over. It was over as far as I was concerned, and she was very careful not to. It was always in French, where I didn't know what in the world was being said. So, it's kind of away from the kids, I guess. She kind of kept that isolated, kept it to herself or themselves. And That wasn't a big part, but that's a funny thing. Yes, Ralph, I can hear that. All right, it's okay. We'll leave that alone. No lost sheep. I'd like to read Luke 15. Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 3. Don't lose those sheep. Luke 15, starting in verse 3. And he spake this parable unto them, saying, What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he lose one of them, does he not leave the 99 in the wilderness, and go after that which is lost, until he find it? And when he hath found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying unto them, Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. I say unto you, that likewise joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repents, more than over 99 just persons which need no repentance. The shepherd in this does not just let the sheep go. He doesn't just let it walk off and be gone because he's still got 99. Like that's not the attitude that is taken. And in the context of sin, I suppose, if we're looking at it in that light, you could think of it in more of a good riddance. Good riddance. You're going to do that? Good riddance. Or you're bringing it on yourself, or whatever it may be. And that's not necessarily the compassionate example of Christ, who would go after and would attempt to return and restore and keep his flock whole and keep each and every one safe, that personal connection and concern there. And, we got to confront some weird stuff sometimes and different problems that come up. We got an email from the two witnesses a couple weeks ago. I heard some other pretty radical ideas this last week from people who, you think that they're sincere because it seems like a big deal. They're pretty emotional and they're torn up about it. And while it's so much that you're like, how do I even start to appreciate what this person is saying? It would be like, okay, it'd be easy to dismiss it and be like, bye, but if you think of those types of situations from God's point of view, is that how he views it? Or does he view it as somebody who is sincere but is getting themselves lost or away from the flock, or out on some tiny branch or some stuff? Is there compassion? Is there a desire to restore the relationship, to return it, to make it whole again, to bring it back home and to celebrate over it? It's easier said than done, but maybe that's the attitude in which Christ looks at it. That's certainly the example in this parable, a shepherd that goes out to find the sheep and rejoices when he is returned again. Mammy never let me go. I always felt like she really kept up with me, and that was important in my life. I moved back to live with my dad. I was about 13 years old, so I wasn't around Mammy 5 days a week anymore or anything like that. But it was always a very close relationship. That's something that I could certainly do better in my own life, is maintaining contact and close relationships with people who are outside of my immediate sphere every day. That's something I felt like I've struggled with. But she was certainly good at that. We talked every week, and it was her doing the calling and the keeping up with my life and showing up for events or band concerts or sporting events or whatever it may be, whatever was going on. She was there. She was that. I don't know. She was there. You knew that she loved you and she cared and she wanted to maintain that relationship, and she did so. That was very valuable. That's something that a grandparent or any kind of mentor, any kind of close friend can do for somebody else. That at the time, you're 15, 16 years old. You're talking on the phone to your grandma. It's nice, but there's other things to do too. But in retrospect, you realize that really means a lot, and keeping that relationship intact through more tumultuous years is very valuable in the end. Joy stayed involved, stayed close, and she was always comfortable and easy to talk to. So even when I was a stupid teenager, I would often try out a bunch of stupid stuff on her, and she didn't, get mad, but she didn't take any guff either. She would have a way of shutting it down and being like, "Oh well, you're wrong. You'll find out." She'd lay it out there, but she dealt with enough teenagers to know you're only going to get so far, and they're going to end up having to figure it out on their own. I love her for that very, very much. Even when I was 19 years old, I had my own apartment, living stupid, living stupid and dirty. It was so messy. she knew that I was smoking cigarettes, and that's bad. So she would send me articles about smoking and how bad it was for me in the mail. My grandmother would mail me newspaper and magazine articles about eating right and not smoking. You know, you go to check the mail with your roommates and like, oh, look, this one's from your grandma. You should quit smoking. Thank you, Mammy. You were right. It was hard to quit. Good grief. You know, I probably smoked for 7 years, and I was quitting for 5 of them. So she was right. It would have been easier to just stop right then. Got to learn it the hard way. Yeah, but, you know, that's the shepherd-type attitude. You just don't let somebody go. You don't just let them continue in error, continue in some habit that's going to hurt them, that's going to damage their life without at least making an attempt, without at least saying something, the warning message, you know, like Ezekiel was called to give. Stan was talking about that last week. You know, there's a responsibility there at the very least to put it out there in the open and you know, witness to the truth, to coin a phrase. If I could think of a different one, I would have used a different one. And a lot of these lessons, I feel like I learned in retrospect, they were not obvious at the time. It wasn't formal instruction, like you're just sitting there. It's really only clear when you look back at it, or you know, when I started reading and studying and coming to the truth. You know, you can see some of these principles. I could see some of these principles in conduct, and you do. When you start studying the Bible, you see the principles in it, both good and bad, in the conduct of the people all around you, and you end up recognizing both sides of that in all the different ways that it surrounds you. And you know, that's very much a statement like in Matthew 7 about, you know, a tree being known by its fruits. The good tree doesn't bring forth evil fruit, and so on and so forth. I won't turn and read that, but that's very much what it is. You know, there were other examples where I felt like she was intentionally trying to teach me a more overt, intentional lesson. There are those scriptures about feeding the hungry or clothing, helping the needy, and all that. In Matthew 25, if anybody's hungered, you know, you give him to eat. And Christ goes on to say, you know, you did it to, I was hungry and you fed me. And they say, you know, when did we do that? He said, anytime you saw any of these little ones that needed it, you know, you did it, you know, you did it in mine. It's as if you did it to me, essentially. That's valuable. That's a valuable thing to do. You know, if you think you could minister to the Lord in that way, and yet you do have the opportunity, according to his words, you have that opportunity. I remember a time that we were driving together. I was pretty small. And there was a homeless guy out there with his sign, whatever, begging for money. And we went back home, and she made a sandwich, and we drove back up there and gave him a sandwich. Like, he probably wanted some cash instead, but he got a sandwich. So he didn't go hungry. And, you know, that's before. Obviously, that can be endemic, and there's people that are out there to rob you, or they're out there just to make a quick buck when they don't need to be, but you don't really know one way or the other what their condition is. And maybe they are on drugs. Maybe they are an alcoholic. But maybe if you give them $5 and they get some booze or some drugs, maybe they're not going to go rob somebody else for that same thing. So you never know what impact your actions will have. And it certainly doesn't redound back poorly on you to be compassionate, to be giving. Like, there's never going to be a negative thing as far as you're concerned. Whatever they end up doing with it, you know, we have a personal responsibility as well that's really outside of that. Along those same lines, I remember she had me giving money to the Salvation Army when I was little, 3 or 4 or something. She had me donating my coins to the Salvation Army. I don't even know how I had coins. She probably made me do some work and gave me coins and then made me donate a portion of them back to the Salvation Army. And there was some confusion because at that point in time, she hadn't explained the Salvation Army very well. I thought it was a military organization. I didn't know it was Catholic charity or whatever it might be. Not that they don't do good work; they do good things. You know, there's plenty of good that's done there. But I did think it was more militaristic than it turned out. To be. I'd like to read another verse in Proverbs 19. See if I wrote down the right one in Proverbs 19 this time, or if I could find it. What do we got here? Proverbs 19:17. He that has pity upon the poor lends unto the Lord, and that which he hath given him will he pay him again. And that's a good way to look at any charitable, kind action that you can do. You know, you're lending it to the Lord as if you're doing it in his name, the same thing that Christ reiterated later on. Other overt lessons. My first recollection of anybody telling me about the return of Jesus Christ was actually Mammy. And I was a really little guy, and she was describing how the nations would actually try to fight him, gather together and try to fight him at his second coming, which is some pretty heavy stuff for a 3 or 4-year-old, but it's also true. And it did make an impression, and I'd like to read that in Revelation 17. Revelation 17, starting in verse 12. And the 10 kings which you saw, 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. War with the Lamb. The nations are going to make war with the Lamb when he returns. And she described that very graphically and extrapolated a little bit. And I remember her saying that angels, they're going to fly up and they're going to take the guns and they're going to turn them on the bad guys. And, whoa, like maybe you're just you're elaborating on the point that we have here. But still, that made a very strong impression on me. I remember that discussion very clearly, and I remember the fact that the nations will be fighting Christ when he returns. And I don't think I ever told her that, that I remembered that when I was grown or anything like that. That's kind of throwaway type conversation you might have with a kid when it feels like there's an opportunity and it comes up, and maybe you don't realize the strong impression that you're making on a little mind, or, putting something in terms that they can understand, because it made it very, very real for me. It made that moment, like, whoa, this is really going to happen, and this is how it's going to happen, more so than, the nations are going to gather together and make war with the Lamb. It's like, that's pretty cut and dry. That's not exactly, you're going to remember it 35 years later and you were 3 or something. It's maybe not the same, doesn't have the same impact. Just a lot, so much. I don't want to go on too long, because there's more even than I wrote down. I don't even know. Didn't really know how to stop or where to stop when you think back over somebody's whole life, or over your experience with them during your whole life, and more so what you know about them and the history and all that, and to appreciate how some of these concepts were there and were visible, and even if you weren't word for word aware of them as it was going on, that's the example. That's the fruit of what God says. That's living it. And not that everybody doesn't have faults. And obviously I put my grandmother, who I adore, on a pedestal. I absolutely do put her on a pedestal. And it's hard to help that. But we're all people. We all have our low points and our shortcomings, and that's very much true in this relationship that I'm talking about as well. But there is a value in those high points and in those principles of God that you internalize and that are passed on, that you can pass on very forcefully to an impressionable child when you're around them, and leading through example, I guess. And that's the responsibility of parents to children. It's the responsibility of grandparents to their grandchildren, aunts, uncles, whoever it may be, friends. If you have the opportunity to make that kind of impact on a young, impressionable life, you don't know necessarily when you're going to be able to instill a very important moral or piece of truth, or just an example of how to overcome and handle a situation better, and what will stick. And I'm sure you all have those same kinds of memories of events with relatives, grandparents, friends, coaches, teachers, I don't know, whatever it may be, where somebody did or said something that stuck with you. And they probably don't even remember what it was, but you remember what it was, and that it intricately becomes a part of who you are. It ends up being a part about who you are. It ends up being a part of you. And in a way, I'm kind of sorry for talking so much about myself today, but I wanted to illustrate that point. And in this month of thinking about her, she's asleep now. That just comes out. You have an opportunity to reflect on someone after they're gone, and really savor the best parts of what you got from them. It's amazing, though, the impact that a loving, involved grandparent can have, and it meant so much to me, more than you can appreciate while it's going on. when you think you're just running around, you're just having fun, you're just playing games, you're running errands together, you're doing chores. She was always very, involved. We're cleaning. Let's clean. You want to help me do this? Come help me, wash some vegetables or whatever it is, sweep the floor. It doesn't have to be some big thing. It's fun for a child, and it becomes a lesson because you're treating them like a person, like a friend, like an equal, and that ends up having a powerful impact. I hope that's something that we can all pass along, because it's foundational. It's foundational to bettering the world, to protecting society. And when those sorts of things start to crumble, that's when you have distance. That's when you have violence. That's when you have a lack of charity, and we feel like the government needs to be involved in every aspect of making sure everything's okay for everybody all the time, and nobody gets their feelings hurt or anything. When this should all begin at home, and then in the church, and then in the community. This kind of attitude of bolstering and training and helping, it needs to ripple through society from the other side, not from the top down, but from the bottom up, until it permeates the whole thing. It would all be so much better. And that's pretty much all I have today. My mammy's dead. She's dead now. She's asleep, though. She's not gone. These parts of her are going to live on in me. I hope they live on in my children. I hope I can pass those same kind of lessons on. I want those kinds of relationships for my children with their grandparents, knowing how much they mean and how valuable that is to have that support as time goes on. And she made it till almost 91. That's a good long life. That's a good long time to be with somebody and to enjoy them. And yet it's so short. When it's done, it's so short and it's gone. And not everybody has that long. That's longer than most. That's far above average, I would say. She was always very committed to, we walked after dinner, ate fresh foods, organic stuff. Mammy's eating bran and weird things all the time. She said, put these bran on your cereal. Like, that's disgusting. I don't want that. Meanwhile, Mammy's 91, and she only died because she didn't have anything left to do and couldn't remember good anymore. Other than that, she was going strong. That was kind of all that it was. It wasn't, debilitating disease or anything like that. And that's a good example too. I'm thankful to have that, and it's out there. Positive impact on those around you, positive changes in the world, and all of that I got from her, that everybody else that was around her, all those other kids she babysat, all the other grandchildren, my siblings, my cousins, it's for everybody. This is what one person can offer, even in a quiet way. A little old foreign lady who didn't even speak English all that well had a very big impact on quite a few lives in a very quiet way. A very quiet, stable, and sturdy way. And all of that, all those parts of her, all those lessons live on, and they're not going anywhere. As long as they're passed from generation to generation, they are never, ever going to die. Not ever, ever. And even more than that, her character is intact and is waiting for Christ to return, to be resurrected. I'd like to close with 2 Timothy 4, 6 through 8, when Paul, he knows that his time is coming. He's right at the end there, and he says, verse 6, "For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not me only, but unto them all that also love his appearing."